Welcome everyone. I can't see a single face other than Indigo's, but my name is Kellen Brewer. I'm the Student Activation Manager for Thirst Project, the world's largest youth water organization. I'm super excited to be here. Like many of you probably thought that ICON was going to get canceled. It's really cool to be here present, getting to connect in the virtual space. Although I can't see your faces, I'm sure there's some people on here that I know and have met before. If I haven't, I'm excited to share a little bit about the work we do at Thirst Project and just kind of look back on the last few months and just talk about high level how we can come out of this even stronger than ever. But I'm going to pass it over really quick to Indigo along with me. Indigo, if you want to say hi to everyone and introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Indigo Parlin. I'm a current international trustee on the 2019-2020 International Board. This year, I serve the districts of California, Nevada, Hawaii, Carolinas, and Minnesota, Dakotas. And I'm super excited to be here facilitating for you, Kellen.
Nice. Thank you, Indigo. I'm excited to have you. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop so that my face is still available to see. Can everybody see this presentation clearly? I guess, Indigo, I'm going to have you monitor comments throughout, but if you ever get a no, if anybody says that they can't see anything, just let me know, and I'm happy to sort of take a pause and readapt. But
all right, it looks
yeah,
like
so you came to the right session. I'm excited to talk about not only how Thirst Project has taken action amidst a global pandemic, but also just at a high level, how you can learn as a young person, as a Key Club leader, perhaps a current Key Club leader, perhaps a future Key Club leader, how you can respond to situations just like this one. Now, first and foremost, hang on guys, make sure I can click through. Oh, there we go. Cool, so what just happened? It's been a crazy few months, and you might share the same sentiment in thinking that time has just continued to go fast and so much has happened that when I look back, I almost forget how crazy so much of this has been. And if we look all the way back to December of 2019, if you can picture where you were before the start of the new year, in December is when that initial outbreak came in China. And when we were first sort of learning in the early stages, we were sort of realizing what was happening at a regional level, not even yet a global level. And the reality is that most of us probably weren't even relatively considering that there would be a global pandemic. And as the new year turned, you guys celebrated, you marked the start of another year. 2020 was a big milestone. And as the year progressed, sort of the second big point that I wanted to emphasize was February of 2020, when the official declaration of COVID-19, the naming took place. WHO, World Health Organization, was starting to really look even closer at what was happening and the potential spread and what that would look like. And as months progressed, as weeks progressed, as you all know, things got a little more serious. And what started as a regional outbreak became an epidemic, which slowly turned to a pandemic. I guess I shouldn't say slowly, quickly turned to a pandemic. And as all of us know, March of 2020, for us specifically in the United States, was kind of crazy, and it was something that we didn't expect, but the stay-at-home orders were issued. I'm sure all of us remember where we were when we first learned about, man, what was it going to look like for the next few weeks? I guess I'm going to be indoors. I guess school isn't going to be happening. All of a sudden, things were starting to change. And then looking at where we are now, global totals have surpassed 10 million in terms of diagnosis, and then I think we're over 500,000 now in terms of deaths. So looking back, it has been a whirlwind. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this in your own personal lives. The fact that we're all going through this is a bit of a connector. And what I really wanted to sort of highlight was, what is Thirst Project's role in this, and how have we been able to pivot and adapt and still create impact amidst a global pandemic? And many of you have probably heard a Thirst Project presentation before, whether it's a speaker that came to your school, a presentation at ICON in years past, or maybe even a speaker like myself that came to your DCON. But there might be some of you out there out of the hundreds that are online right now. And if you don't know, Thirst Project is the world's largest youth water organization. What does that really mean? So who we are is hundreds of thousands of students all over the world that come together in the name of clean water. We're active in 5 countries around the world where we serve. And the reason we exist, our why as an organization and a movement of young people, is to end the water crisis, because as we all know, there are still hundreds of millions of people on our planet that do not have access to basic, safe, clean drinking water. And when you think about Thirst Project, the work that we do to provide communities with access to clean water, it's really relevant in that all of us during all this time have been issued to wash with clean water and soap regularly, practice proper hygiene and sanitation. So the need for Thirst Project was at an all-time high, but the landscape of how we operate drastically changed. And when I talk about urgency, the reality is that the work we do is very urgent. And a lot of times we don't get to articulate that because the nature of, in the United States, everybody has access to clean water. So it's tough to understand the fact that hundreds of millions of people are still depending on open, unprotected water sources every single day. And what that really means and translates to is that actual lives, mothers, husbands, daughters, sons, kids, students just like us every single day are dying from easily preventable waterborne diseases. Things like diarrhea that in the United States, we don't even think of as a life-threatening disease. Yet in the developing world, it kills over 1,000 children every single day. So there's a major sense of urgency to our work in the way that we operate. And with the outbreak of COVID-19, it became tough because urgency for our work shifted a bit in that we were limiting around the world the amount of human interactions that we had, the connections that we had, the way in which we were sort of operating at organizational levels, whether that's a nonprofit or for-profit. But the reality is there's a big sense of urgency to our work. So after this timeline, now that we're sort of months down the road, I wanted to talk through 4 really important steps of how to respond to situations like a global pandemic, how to respond to situations of uncertainty or crises that you don't foresee. And my hope is that after I talk through sort of the framework of this model and then what Thirst Project has done to sort of adhere to this model, my hope is that you will walk away learning how you can adapt in times of uncertainty, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's with your Key Club, whether it's with your entire district. And I hope that you learned something. I'm excited at the end to sort of ask some questions, hopefully get some volunteer responses. And we're also going to hear from Indigo a little bit and how Key Club International has adapted and responded. But first and foremost, in terms of how to respond to a situation like a global pandemic, I sort of broke it down into 4 categories. So first and foremost, one of the biggest and most important things to do is assess the situation. And hopefully we all do this even in our personal lives if we're making a decision. If you're ever challenged or put in an uncomfortable spot, one of the first things you want to do is before you act, before you make drastic, quick decisions, you really want to assess the situation around you. And after that, the second sort of step that I wanted to highlight was responding, but specifically responding effectively. And as an organization and from that framework, it's very important in the way that we responded. And number 3, I have on here staying connected. So what I mean by that is in situations, especially of crises, it's really important to stay connected to those around you. I think one of the quotes that we say all the time at Thirst Project is, if you want to go fast in life, go alone. But if you want to go far in life, go together. And I think it's so important to retain that even in situations of crises because of the need to stay together and support one another. And the 4th sort of point that I want to highlight throughout this presentation is learning and growing. We'll talk about this quite a bit at the end. But first and foremost, in looking at assessing the situation, these are sort of some of the barometers to help you assess the situation. And it's especially relevant to us as an organization and to so many around the world that face really tough situations. But one of the first things, our top priority always as an organization that works with young people is safety. Thinking about safety of yourself, of those around you, of your team, of those that you employ. Thinking about needs versus wants. So in situations where we have goals, we have sort of a blueprint for how we expect our life to look, especially in the coming days and months and years, and things that we maybe wanted to do prior to the outbreak of COVID-19 changed because all of a sudden they weren't necessities. All of a sudden there were greater risks. And one of the things that we were faced with at Thirst Project was also the idea of opportunity costs. potentially making one decision and the time spent in that decision taking away from where we would have been had we made the original smart decision. So in assessing situations, you want to think about what are your outlets, what are your options, and what will the opportunity cost be if maybe you wait too long to take a step that you think and probably deep down know you should take, but sort of wait too long to take. And the sort of last component of assessing a situation is thinking about short and long term. And we all had to sort of go through this. All of us have probably been learning as we've going, but nevertheless, thinking about the immediate short term of our lives and the lives around us, and also the long term of how something like a global pandemic can affect society in the long term. And it's something that we've all been sort of juggling at multiple levels. But for Thirst Project case, there's really two components to our work. So for us, we had to think about the student world and the students that we have that take action for Thirst Project every single year. And then we had to think about the water projects that we fund and what that would look like. But in assessing the situation, spring for us is a huge monumental time of the year because we have walks for water, dozens of large walks for water that raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we host these every single year. And these are a big source of funding for water projects around the world. And as you probably all know, some of you have actually heard a presentation like I mentioned before, but we also have our school tour. And at Thirst Project, our school tour has historically been the backbone of our work because where we send speakers around the country to educate young people about the water crisis, speaking at key clubs and decons and high schools and colleges. It's the way in which we continue our work and bring students on board to what we're doing. But that takes place every fall and spring. And then also we have a big legacy summit that we now host every year. We have our Thirst Project Gala. So two monumental events that we as a staff host. And all of a sudden we sort of had to think, shoot, how could these change? Or will the planning potentially be affected by this? And last but not least, decons and big speaking events. We speak internationally at big conferences. We speak at decons every single year. So for us in assessing the situation at Thirst Project, we had to sort of think through, man, what aspects of our world in the student side of things are going to be affected by cancellations and potential big changes? And then from the other side of our work, from the work that we do to implement freshwater wells and water projects for communities in need, we had to assess the situation and realize there were still communities around the world that need clean water. First and foremost, we had to realize that the communities where we work in developing nations typically are at the greatest risk because, as I mentioned earlier, communities a lot of times don't have access to clean water, health and sanitation, sometimes lack education training that's so important. So the areas where we work were actually at the greatest risk. And on top of that, travel became incredibly limited, where we normally would be sending teams not only across the world, but also within nations, our country directors to communities, to assess communities, to conduct reports. All of a sudden, that was drastically changing. Travel was becoming limited. And the last sort of aspect of with the water project work that we do was that outbreak levels were rising quickly. For us, that meant that there was a potential spread into developing areas that were at such high, great risk. I'm going to take a quick pause. I saw a couple of questions pop up. Is anybody having trouble seeing anything? Indigo, I'm going to chime on you here before I exit out of my screen.
I think that everything's going well. I'm answering a few of the questions in the chat. Would you like me to ask them at the end, though?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. We'll just kind of keep a note of those and ask them at the end. But yeah, I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to keep going. But for us, this is how we had to assess the situation. We had to think about the student side of our world, the events that were planned, and we had to think about water projects and the urgency and need that we have as an organization to provide communities with access to clean water. And as we continued, we went to sort of the next step of the four that I outlined. And that next step, that second step in responding to a situation like a global pandemic, is responding effectively. So we had to sort of think about how can we continue to accomplish goals that we had set, but in a new way. And there's really two key words in responding effectively to situations and challenges. And those words are adapt and pivot. Even if it means temporarily changing your mission, it's so important that being put in a new situation, you find ways to accomplish goals that you had before, knowing that it won't look exactly the same. You may not accomplish all of the goals that you had previously set, but nevertheless, it's so important to think about this when responding to situations, especially for Thirst Project in responding to a global pandemic. So what we did is we sort of mapped out what this response would look like. And in the student side of things, it became, man, we want to continue to engage students the best way we possibly can in the ways that we know. Even though that we can't meet in person, host our school tour, and travel the country, a lot of that had to get canceled. So we had to find creative ways to continue to engage our worldwide network. And on top of that, we decided if we can't do fundraising events the same way that we know, or if we can't support our Thirst Project clubs, what we can do is continue to educate in the virtual space. So what we've been doing is hosting study hall sessions throughout the last couple of months where students have been able to come online. Some students on here might have actually gotten to attend a study hall session or two, but it was a great way to connect our audience in the virtual space, accomplishing a goal that we always have as an organization to engage our student network and educate them about the water crisis, but we were just finding a different way to do it. And another way in which we sort of responded effectively was hosting some virtual fundraising events, whether they were small campaigns with specific groups or sort of large global campaigns that we had set. We found ways to do events and will continue to in the virtual space. And last but not least, we had some live streams. We wanted to continue the fun, youthful side of Thirst Project. So we hosted live streams with some of our past road warriors, some of our staff members, found ways to engage our online social network and be able to sort of talk through the work that we were doing in real time. And on the water project side of things, I really want to highlight this because with the outbreak of COVID-19, we at Thirst Project had to pivot. And if you're not super familiar with Thirst Project, I want to quickly speak to the fact that all of the work that we do revolves around the idea of sustainability. Because in the water project space, so many organizations take shortcuts, and inevitably water projects fail over time, or communities temporarily have access to water, and then based on some sort of shortcoming or sort of a corner that was cut, if a water project fails, all of a sudden the community has to go back to not having clean water, which can be incredibly detrimental. So all of our work typically is a longer process, has more steps involved, and it's because our mission is to provide communities with clean water, but doing so in a way that's long-term. However, with the situation that changed, what we realized is that we couldn't send our drilling teams or our country directors into the field to work with local villages and communities, because even if there was a small risk, we couldn't afford to risk exposing developing areas, rural villages to the outbreak of COVID-19. For us, it was too much of a risk, and in assessing the sort of opportunity cost, we realized that we could do things differently. So we found a new way to provide communities with clean water, even if it was temporary, knowing that clean water and sanitation, proper hand washing techniques were incredibly important to stop the spread of the pandemic. So what we did is we launched a COVID-19 relief fund. We altered the way in which we fund projects. We started providing big water tanks to communities in need, and also hand sanitizer and hand washing stations and all of the materials that would help communities prevent the spread of the pandemic in their villages and rural areas. And it was incredibly effective. We were able to raise over $130,000 from this. Thousands of lives were changed. We were actually able to do more outreach than ever. So whereas normally our outreach would consist of basically going to communities, spending lots of time there, establishing a long-term solution, we were actually working in more communities than we'd ever worked in before because we were doing short-term solutions. So we were building connections with villages. So after things return to normal, we'll actually be able to build water projects faster than ever. So we really were able to continue our mission in a way that was effective, but it was because we took the time to assess the situation. And the sort of third part of responding to something like global pandemic that I wanted to highlight is the need to stay connected, especially if you're a club, an organization, part of a school that sort of works as an entire unit and collective. And it's so important when, especially all of us are being forced to stay at home, that there's a huge need to stay connected, to be there for our network and community, even amidst uncertainty. And the way that we outlined that we'd be able to do that was through 3 specific tiers. And the first tier was positivity. during dark times, there's nothing more important than positivity. There needs to be hope of an end. There needs to be a belief that things will get better. So as you guys know, if you've ever interacted with a Thirst Project staff member or anyone on our team, we're always trying to be positive, uplifting, supportive. And that next word, support, is also incredibly important. So not just providing positivity, but also providing direct support to people in our network. And we saw this around the world with different brands, organizations, nonprofits that were really supporting their networks, their followers, making sure they were okay, offering help, offering masks, whatever it looked like. And the last tier is one that probably not a lot of people think about, but was especially important for us, and that's opportunity. The reality is that we don't always think about this one, but it's so important when we're faced with something like a global pandemic that there's opportunity for us to feel a sense of contribution and belonging. And at first we thought, shoot, as an organization, does it make sense for us to continue putting opportunities out there when there are so many important sort of relief efforts that are happening, or when communities are actually facing financial uncertainty that they maybe have never felt before? But it's incredibly important, and hopefully you guys have realized this too during times amidst the pandemic, that we have an opportunity to contribute and feel a sense of connection and belonging. So for Thirst Project, that's exactly what we did. We engaged our students, like I mentioned earlier. We supported our teams around the world. We had study hall sessions. I sort of talked through some of these, but really the value of what we did is we found ways to improve our work. And in talking about positivity, it was all about sending good messages out there, reaching out to some of the clubs and leaders that we work with. It was supporting our teams around the world in developing areas, our country directors, the families that we've worked with, communities where we've provided water solutions, sending words of encouragement, sending any resources that we could. And for students, it was providing opportunities to continue to take action, to sort of host club events in the virtual space, even if they weren't fundraisers, and find ways to make sure that our network was staying connected and that we weren't just taking a back seat. And I think hopefully you guys have realized that, especially leaders out there, whatever level you're leading at, it's so important that during these times of uncertainty, we're staying connected, we're supporting one another, and we're sort of not just hiding in the back, waiting for things to end and come back to normal, but adapting and then connecting in new ways than ever before. And the last sort of tier that I wanted to highlight is learning and growing. And there's a quote that I love that's from a guy named Jerry Lorenzo, if anyone's heard, but the biggest loss in the end is if we come out on the other side unchanged. And I think this has really defined so much of what Thirst Project does and has changed a lot of our personal lives, but it's so important that we see, even looking back at that month-to-month timeline that I presented in the beginning and sort of looking at back, wow, back in December is when things were starting to get a little bit crazy, and seeing how they've progressed. A lot of times it's easy to sort of mystify our minds and not recognize everything that took place over a period of time, only to then return to how things were before and not learn anything. But in any time of crisis, whether it's at a global level or crisis in your own individual life, there's such an important need to learn and grow from mistakes, challenges, and any form of adversity that you face. And I can't stress this enough, because so many of us face things and we say, why me? Or how could this be happening? Or why didn't my senior year get canceled? I can't believe I can't have a graduation. Finding ways to sort of feel bad for ourselves in the situations we are in, instead of learning and growing and seeing it as, wow, that's an opportunity. I can come out of this stronger. Or had that not happened, I wouldn't have known this information, or I wouldn't have been as strong as a leader or person in my own life. So I think that finding ways to learn and grow has been huge, and especially for Thirst Project. And one of the reasons I wanted to lead this session was to talk through improving how we do things. So as an organization, we've been around for a little over 10 years. And typically, we've just been growing year to year the way in which we do things that are successful. But what took place with the pandemic was it forced us to account for situations that we never would have foreseen otherwise. And for us, we've realized that we can't just wait until everything sort of ends, so to speak, and then just go back to doing things the way that we always did things. we need to be flexible. We need to realize that things could continue to change. There's no immediate end in sight. So we as an organization have restructured how we do things. We've thought differently in sort of how we can impact communities around the world, how we can educate students about the water crisis and challenge them to take action. And my hope is that you guys have done this as well, whether it's changing how you host elections, changing how your Key Club operates, how meetings take place. There's so much in areas where we've had to pivot and adapt, but one thing is coming out and not just adapting in the moment, but learning from those adaptations and having them help us grow to be even stronger than ever before. And another thing for us is doing more than just clean water. And these last two sort of go hand in hand, but for us as an organization, yes, we exist to end the water crisis, and that will always be one of the focal points of our mission. But during a time like this, if you follow Thirst Project on social media, if you receive our monthly emails, if you have any communication, you've probably seen that we don't just want to be an organization that is a funnel of money to provide communities with clean water, but we want to be more than that. And we want to promote tolerance and inclusivity and diversity and positivity, like I mentioned before. And what we've been trying to do is respond to these times to do more than just ask for money or ask for donations to support water projects, but support the people that stay engaged with Thirst Project, help out students around the world that have sacrificed and given up time to support our mission. And on top of that, brings up the third point, of supporting everyone. And this has been huge for Thirst Project. We've got one of our old Thirst Project shirts on right now, but I want to wear this shirt because we've also been living in a time where racial inequality has been at the forefront of so many minds, and it's finally becoming an issue that people are paying attention to and really looking at in deeper levels than ever before. And as an organization that serves Black communities around the world and cares deeply about everyone that's a part of our network, not just limited communities, it's been so important for us as an organization to respond to the inequalities that we've seen around the world, to support movements and individuals, even if it doesn't mean providing clean water, even if a movement is about positivity or tolerance or sort of meshes up with one of our goals as an organization to have a better world and a better planet, then we're going to be there to support. And it sort of goes back to something I was talking about with accomplishing goals, even if it means doing so in new ways. So for us as an organization, we've realized, hey, maybe right now, fundraising for Clean Water Project in the United States is going to be a little bit different than it's been in the past. And we're lending our time to other causes, but we know deep down that in not just thinking about the short term, but the long term, if we have a world of equality, it really is what we stand for. Because our mission to end the water crisis, Thirst Project's mission to ensure that every single person on our planet has access to clean water, it really is a mission of equality. And that just doesn't mean equality for certain aspects of lives. It means equality for everyone in every aspect of life. Equal opportunity, equal support, equal love, equal protection. And for us, that's how we've evolved. That's how we've learned and grown. And had we not experienced the pandemic, I don't know that our organization would have been implementing the same changes that we have been today. I don't know that we would have ever had some of the relief efforts that we've had and the ability to pivot on the fly and adapt in new situations. So what I'm getting at, the reason I'm telling you guys all of this and giving you a full overview is because I wanted to pull back the curtain today. I could have just given another Thirst Project presentation. We love to talk about the work that we do, but I wanted to pull back the curtain and show you sort of the human side of Thirst Project and how this has been challenging for us as well. And it's definitely been an unexpected situation, but we've followed these sort of 4 tiers and found ways to improve how we do things, support our networks, become better leaders. And I hope that you guys as individuals have had to do this as well. And I'm interested to hear a little bit about what this looks like for you, but my hope is that you'll sort of see the framework that we had and get to apply some of this in your own lives, learning how to better assess situations, learning how to respond to tough situations effectively. And the reason I pull back the curtain is now, hopefully you can take some of this and apply it to your own clubs and districts and the way in which you fundraise or how you support and connect with one another in the virtual space and how you find ways to continue to accomplish goals and missions that you have set, even if it means doing it in a new, different way. But I've been talking a lot. You guys have probably listened to me talk for now, 30 minutes. I want to turn it over and I want to hear a little bit from Indigo, because our organizations, Thirst Project and Key Club International, have been in unison working together for, over 4 or 5 years now. And it's been amazing to see just how we mirror each other and work together and operate in similar ways. So Indigo, working at the international level, has been faced with a lot of the same challenges that Thirst Project has been faced with. And Indigo, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how Key Club International has been able to sort of pivot, adapt, and respond to the outbreak of COVID-19.
Yeah, so actually, I completely agree with what you're saying about how our organizations are mirroring each other. Because just in how you explained, the how to respond, that's essentially what International did.
Yeah.
And most of you Key Clubbers will know that COVID hit right during decon season, and decons were being canceled literally 2 days before they were supposed to be held.
Right.
So we had a very, immediate, let's assess the situation, let's implement something, let's figure out how we can get everything to continue. And that included, how are we going to hold elections online? How are we going to do an award session live stream to make sure that our members are still recognized for their efforts during the year? I definitely like that piece you talked about of staying connected. I think we found that our international board has been, as a whole, more connected during these past few months than perhaps during the rest of our term. We started holding monthly calls for whoever could, or weekly calls actually, for whoever could make it, so that we could still stay connected, make sure that we're all doing well personally and that our districts are doing well, since the situation was definitely hard for Key Clubs to continue our mission. We had to do a complete, 360. We're not doing service together anymore. We're doing service together, but alone. So
Right.
that was definitely a big piece of it. And I think that in these past few months, we have definitely learned and we've grown a lot. We've obviously learned like all these different tech things. We've learned how to engage people online, how to make sure that we're all doing well mentally and physically. I had some notes. I'm trying to remember if I covered
No,
it.
that's okay. And I'd love to hear too that you're talking about sort of a holistic approach. It's not just, hey, we're going to change how we fundraise and serve, but we're also going to think about us as people more and support one another. And like, even you talking about how the board sort of became stronger during this. Talk me through like what happened when you guys were first sort of realizing, oh, wow, things are going to get canceled and we're going to have to change the way we operate. What was kind of like the thought process there?
It was definitely a lot of sadness at the beginning. It was definitely a lot of emotions because, we definitely look forward to these events through our whole terms. But then I feel like just the culture of Key Club and the type of people that Key Club attracts is those like go-getter people that immediately see a problem and they start to solve it. And I really saw that starting to kick in, and I really saw people rise to the occasion and problem solve together and collaborate. And communicate with each other. It was really empowering to see, actually.
Yeah, I think that resilience and that ability to say like, hey, this is a tough situation that we're all going through, but we as young leaders and sort of trailblazers in our own communities, this is our time. Like this is when we can step up, we can continue to make a difference, we can find new ways to do things that we've done before. And I think that's been like such an inspirational thing for Thirst Project to see is as we kind of help mentor and support students around the world. We've seen clubs step up in new ways. We've seen leaders really take charge and find creative ways to do things that even adults in their world weren't even thinking about doing. So that's absolutely true. And I love that. And talk me through even setting up a virtual icon. Like how did that come to be and how were you guys able to make that happen?
I'm just going to say, I feel like a lot of things were last minute, but I don't feel like they were thrown together. I feel like there was a lot of consideration that went into the logistics of how we held this. There was a lot of planning that went into workshops and making sure that those will be engaging. I know I'm on the International Convention Committee, so we did a lot of thinking about like, how can we make this year, which is going to be virtual, still really engaging for members, and how can we utilize the situation that we're in and make it better than it would have been in person, like how can we engage more members than we usually do? So that was a big piece of it.
I think that's awesome. And I think that growth is huge. And we talked about it a little bit, but yeah, how can we come out of this, not just equal to where we were before, but actually stronger and better than we were before, and find ways to improve in sort of how we operate. And I think that we've seen some challenges. I was scrolling through the questions, a couple about, man, how did you fundraise during this time? Or what are some events that Key Clubs can do to fundraise in the virtual space? And I think this varies for everyone, and it varies based on where you are in the country and the world. It varies based on your club size, your school size. But I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give is, if you find ways to connect, to really articulate whatever your mission is and the value of it, then I think you'll be successful. So what I mean by that is, if you're hosting a virtual fundraiser, if you're just going online, if you're setting up a landing page for donations and just sending out email blurbs, it's not really a connection that is going to be effective. So it's super important that if you're hosting a virtual fundraiser, whatever you decide to do, there has to be a connection, whether it's connecting like we're doing now, being able to still give a presentation and talk to, it looks like over 300 students and advisors right now across the country. It's like we're actually building that connection. And if it was a smaller group, we'd even be doing it in a way that is almost more organic, even though we're in the virtual space, because we'd be seeing each other's faces. So some of the best fundraising events that we've seen have been those events that really connect. And I'll give some examples in a sec. But the second sort of framework that has been hugely important for us is really like addressing impact and what it means. And I would say this not just with virtual fundraising events, but any fundraising event you do. It's so important that you, as a leader and a host of a fundraiser or an event, articulates to supporters and attendees the value of what you're doing. So really what I mean by that is either quantifying or qualifying your impact in a way that's understandable. So if I'm a student hosting a walk for water, so let's just say I'm Kellen, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna walk 3.75 miles to do a walk for water. If I just said, hey, I'm doing a walk for water for Thirst Project, donate to my page and support what I'm doing, if you were a supporter and you saw that, you probably wouldn't be that engaged. You definitely say, oh, they're doing something important. Sounds like they're attacking the water crisis, but you don't have that like deep understanding of what the impact is. Versus if I said, hey, I'm Kellen, on Saturday, I'm going to go out, I'm going to run 3.75 miles, which is the average distance that women and children in developing communities walk every single day to collect water that's not even clean. And 100% of my donations are going to go directly to providing communities in the Kingdom of Eswatini in Southern Africa with access to safe, clean drinking water. This water is going to help them live, change their lives, make sure that kids can go to school. Like if you sort of hear that articulation, it really changes things, because as a supporter and attendee, you all of a sudden are realizing the enormity and the gravity of the issue at hand, and then you feel inclined to support. So I give those two sort of precursors so that when you think about hosting events, if you find a way to connect in the virtual space right now or in person at a safe distance, I think that's going to be a really good baseline. But then also, if you have an actual goal, and maybe your goal isn't even to fundraise, but whatever your goal is, really articulate it in a way that makes attendees and supporters not only willing but excited to support your goals and excited to come out and help you. But to name a few fundraising events that we've seen have been personal challenges. So I mentioned like walks, but we've seen runs where basically we've seen groups that do, hey, on this day, we're either going to walk or run, whatever you're willing to do. You're going to log your miles, and then we're going to come up with the cumulative totals of how many miles were walked by our group. And then all of the miles that we raise, we're going to get pledges from some of our local community members. Maybe it's $1 a mile, maybe it's 50 cents a mile. And then whatever we raise, we're going to have one collective number of how many miles we walked as a group and how many lives we changed as a result of our hard work. So that's one example. But we've also seen sort of game nights online to host or to raise awareness. In terms of fundraising, we've seen really successful online pages through like live stream promotion or filming of videos, articulating the impact. We've seen just students be able to be really successful there. But I'd say with any fundraiser, it's finding a way to be creative and then accomplishing those two goals of connecting and articulating what your impact is. I would love to answer some other questions. Indigo, I don't know if you personally have any. If not, if any of the, looks like over 300, want to drop a question, make sure it's appropriate, please, in the chat box. I would love to sort of take the last 5 minutes that we have here to answer some questions. So feel free to drop a question if you have one.
All right. Would it be all right if I just start reading you some of the ones that have been coming up a lot?
Yes.
All right. So what are some of the most creative or unique fundraisers that you've seen?
Shoot, that's a tough one. I think I saw a yoga challenge that was really cool where a student continued to hold poses until she got X amount of donations. That was really cool to see. There's a club that we have, a Thirst Project club in Madrid right now that is doing some really cool stuff. I don't want to spoil too much, but they have this really creative, like, running fundraising idea that's coming up where they've found ways to get local sponsorships through the run that they're hosting. That's really awesome. We have a student, she might actually be on here. She's a past Key Clubber. Her name is Jenna Gilbreth, but she's doing another challenge where for every X amount of donations that she gets through Venmo, she like posted on her Instagram story. She's doing some fun challenges, some walking, some running, and I just think that's a really cool way to sort of engage her audience. But I'm trying to think, I have like a full list. And the other thing is, I know I'm kind of drawing a blank right now because it's just been a lot of speaking and craziness, but we do have lists that we're posting at Thirst Project of fun ways to continue to stay action, to stay involved, to host virtual fundraisers. We'll be posting those. I'm also going to post my email on here. So if anyone wants like an actual list of ideas, I don't want to get too granular right now, but I'm happy to share those lists with your clubs just as sort of support. But yeah, creativity has varied in so many ways, and it's been just fun to see students engage the online space.
For sure. Another question that a lot of people have upvoted is, could our school Key Club host a walk for water? If so, how do we organize one? And maybe you could share where resources are.
That's a good question. I'll be super honest. Most of the resources that we had created were for walks for water that really gathered big groups of people together. So the challenge then becomes, and even this is something where we're learning and we're actually looking to a lot of our student network for how we can host walks for water in the future without bringing large groups together. And I would say, kind of like I talked about earlier, probably the best way to host a walk for water right now would be to do so in either small groups where you've already spent time with individuals. So what I mean by that is, if it's your brother or sister and you've already been in quarantine or social isolation together, then it's okay for you guys to walk together. But what clubs have been doing is taking video clips as they've been walking. We've seen basically all of the individuals walking, but doing so at the same time, just not together. So you can definitely host a walk for water, challenge individuals to map out 3.75 miles. It can be a loop in their neighborhood. It can be somewhere in their community that's safe and distant from everyone else. But as long as they're staying safe and doing the walk, they can live stream it. They can sort of film videos, challenge people to get involved, but really hosting it on one day is a cool way to bring everybody together. But so feel that connection, but also still do something that is meaningful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another one that came up a few times was, how can I get other people to really care about the global water crisis?
Love that question. It's super important. And it's honestly like one of the biggest challenges of my immediate job, of a lot of our student leaders' jobs and tasks that they set out to do. Because the reality is a lot of people don't know about the global water crisis. If you watch the news, if you go on social media, rarely do you see anything about the global water crisis. It is so infrequent, but the reality is, like I mentioned earlier, hundreds of people don't have access to clean water. So what I would tell you is this, and this is probably the best piece of advice I can give. If you think to when you felt compelled to take action, whether it was from a Thirst Project presentation, whether it was from a video you watched, or even a conversation that you had with somebody, really try and break down that moment and that passage of communication to think about what was it that you learned that made you care about the water crisis and compelled to get involved. And I think if you understand what made you feel that way, like made you want to take action, then you can try and recreate that with your audience or individuals in your network or family members, because then you all of a sudden think that, hey, it's not enough to just say, did you know 600 million people don't have access to clean water? Sometimes you actually have to show visuals and sort of describe that in a little bit more detail. But I would say the best way to get somebody to care is to employ the same tactics that helped you care in the first place. And maybe you don't have time to give a full 45-minute presentation, but what you can do is recreate some of that in clear, effective ways. And if you want to know even more about giving presentations or speaking on behalf of Thirst Project, getting community members involved, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm going to post it right now. My email is kellen@thirstproject.org. And we have some awesome new speaker programs coming up where we're essentially going to help young people become better speakers for Thirst Project. I know we have a little bit of time left. Is there any last questions, Indigo, that you wanted to ask?
One that caught my attention was, do you have tips on how we can be effective leaders during this time?
Yes, I would say if you're in a leadership position, find ways to continue to connect with the group that you're leading. Meet on a regular basis, even if it's virtual, have conversations, support one another, connect with past leaders. So connect with your predecessors, learn what went well from them and what didn't go well with them so that you can grow and learn from their mistakes and not just recreate some of their shortcomings. But I would say if you're finding ways to connect, if you're finding ways to pivot and adapt and sort of employ some of the tactics that I just laid out in this presentation, I really think you're going to be good. I know we're out of time, so I wanted to share my screen one more time so that everyone can see my email here if you want to take it. And I have just 2 more updates and then we'll be good to go. But the first is our Legacy Summit 2020. I'm going to post this link in the chat, but we are also hosting a virtual conference next month. It's going to be July 16th and 17th. I'm going to post this in the chat. I would love for you guys to all attend. It's free to any student that wants to get involved. There's no limit to signing up, but you do have to register. But the second thing is my email. If you want to take a screenshot, take a photo right now, it's just kellen@thirstproject.org. So it's super clear and simple. I'd love to hear from you. I know we can't connect right now, but if you want to get your club more involved or your district and set up virtual presentations and communication, I think that would be awesome. And I would love to continue to connect with you guys. But I will post, sorry guys.
When you put that link in the chat, make sure you do it to all panelists and attendees.
Gotcha. Cool. I will do that. Thank you for being patient, guys. Shoot, it's not letting me paste it for some reason. Give me 1 second here. Indigo, any last words that you want to highlight?
Okay, I have like a little soapbox. That's it. I would just say being an effective leader during this time is really essential. I kind of posted on my Key Club Instagram a few weeks ago. Right now, we're in a lot of crises all across like different spectrums. And I think this is a time for Key Clubbers to really show that we are not just leaders in Key Club, we're leaders in our communities, we're leaders in our world. And I think that this is really a time for us to step up and show that we have all these transferable skills that we can use to make change in our communities, because we have these problems that are now on our front step. And I think that there's a lot that we can do about it. So I think it's so important to use all the skills that we have garnered in Key Club and start using them in the real world. And I feel like Key Clubbers are just going to change the world when we do that.
Amazing, Indigo. Those are beautiful last words. Thank you for sharing. You hit it right on the nail. I think the most powerful thing about our generation is that we see the world not just for what it is, but for what it can be. So you guys as young people continue to step up. You're doing amazing things. We at Thirst Project love you so much. We appreciate your support. I'm past my time here, so I don't want to keep going, but I do want to just say thank you for attending and being here. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you guys, and I'm super excited. I posted my email on there. Indigo's going to share hers as well. And if you see that giant link to a Google Doc, it's where you can register for our Thirst Project Legacy Summit. It's going to be in the virtual space next month, and we would love to have you guys there. Thank you so much. Thanks for your help too, Indigo.
Thank you.
Virtual round of applause. All right. I'm going to jump off here. Thank you again. Bye, guys.